Season 1 of Zenless Zone Zero is coming to a close, so I thought now would be a good time to reflect on all the agents the game has given us so far. Now that the game has been out for almost a year, the community generally has a much better idea of how the game works and how it doesn't. Even though every agent is still viable enough to clear endgame content, it's pretty obvious that some agents are worse than others, so I thought it would be fun to look at some of the worst kits the game has so far. My criteria will be pretty vague, but there are two main things I'll judge agents by, which is team contribution and flexibility, which are both pretty self-explanatory. How much are they offering the team, and how many teams can they be used in? With that out of the way, let's get started. Starting off the list at number 5, I have Grace. I'll use this spot just to put most non-limited DPS characters. DPS characters are slightly hard to judge because at their core, with the right and invested supports, any DPS can become a beast, especially if you put them in a stage with favorable buffs and weaknesses. For example, use Nicole and Astra with any DPS and they become amazing. Also, for the most part, the reason they are worse than limited agents is usually just damage. If Hoyo just buffed all these characters' multipliers by some significant amount, suddenly a lot of them could become top tier. Just saying this character is bad because their damage sucks would make for a pretty boring video, even if I could probably just put all the A rank and standard S rank DPSs here, put them in some order, and the list probably wouldn't be that inaccurate. But then we get to Grace, who's an interesting case. Why is she the one on this list instead of any of the other non-limited DPSs I listed? Like I said, if the stage buff favors Anomaly or even Electric Anomaly, she could probably outperform most of the other A rank and standard S rank DPSs. There's still a few things about her that makes me justify her placement here. First off, let's look at how she does her damage. She's an Electric Anomaly character who specializes in applying shock. When shock is applied, it will do damage every time the enemy takes damage with an internal cooldown. Here we have our first problem. As a primary carry, her ability to apply shock doesn't actually matter. If she's applying shocks too quickly, it doesn't matter because if there's duration left in the shock, that's kind of just wasted value. And last, as an effectively damage over time character, she's inherently just going to be worse than someone who can just do all the damage at once if she's the main DPS. Well, there is a solution to that, and that's Disorder. Instead of having her be a primary damage dealer, what if we just had her be a secondary DPS and blow up all the shock damage at once? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Except she's not particularly great at that either. Now this is where she does function best, but she is still simply just outclassed by other Disorder specialists like Bernice, Yanagi, and Vivian. For one, she doesn't do any Anomaly off-field compared to the others, and second, her Electric Anomaly doesn't do her any favors because of any weaknesses. Last, her damage is just simply the weakest of them. She's functional here, but she's also a character that you generally feel like you want to upgrade whenever you can, if you're using her as the Disorder specialist. Her last use case is with Haramasa, and there is decent synergy there, but at least in my experience, the team is a bit harder to pull off than the standard stunner team and more annoying to play. I guess there's also Anton, but I don't think many people care about him, and I'm pretty sure double support is just better than having a dedicated shock support for him. So yeah, 5th worst agent in the game. And number 4, this will probably be the most controversial pick I have, but I'll put Sokaku here. The immediate retort I'll probably get is, but Mono Ice Miyabi is the strongest team in the game. And you absolutely would be correct. That's an extremely special case, so I'll talk about that later. I think our nickname of Slow Kaku mostly describes her problems, but I should still say them anyway. First off, in a game where every character is quick and fluid to play, she's one of the only characters who actively feels clunky. After all, she's a small girl carrying an enormous flag. Her skill feels like it has a lot of weight when you play it, and you feel it when she's planting it. The other main reason for this nickname is her horrendously long animations. Her chain attack feels like the longest in the game. It might not be, but it absolutely feels like that way. Given that stun times are extremely valuable to doing damage, wasting so much time on her is just bad when she's not her primary damage. The same goes for her ultimate. I'd say this is less of a problem since most players cycle through all 3 chain attacks, or long chain attack is an active detriment, but using her ultimate outside of the stun window doesn't harm your damage quite as much, but it still feels like a liability to use a lot of the time. There absolutely are some things you can do to make her play better, such as her instant quick assist on parries or rally cancels, but these are things you do actively to overcome her natural clunkiness. As for her team contribution, her primary selling point is her 1000 bonus attack, which lasts for 30 seconds. In addition, she grants ice buffs. The 1000 attack sounds great until you realize a lot of stage buffs grant attack, and that long buff duration doesn't matter since reapplying buffs or debuffs in Nicole's case isn't really that hard at all. For those reasons, she's rarely used over other supports. If your carry isn't ice, that 1000 attack is not enough to justify using her over Nicole or Lucy or Astra or Caesar. And if you are running a double DPS team, that's even worse because she's usually only buffing one character at a time. You have to go very out of your way to get the buff on the other teammate. So the fact that she has such poor versatility is a major knock on her performance. Alright, now that I'm done flaming her kit, let's talk about her actual good use case. Mono Ice has a very special team that's probably the strongest in the game, but also the hardest to play, and I don't think it's particularly close. I'll go for why, despite all the downside I just mentioned, she's actually a perfect fit for this team. First off, you got all the ice damage buffs. Given that Miyabi does the most damage in the game, she's a very worthy hyper carry to give the buffs. Second, Freeze is a very special anomaly. It actually stops the stun timer, so this lets slow Kaku's slowness matter much less, since it's no longer wasting precious stun time if you use them properly. This also applies with Miyabi's Frostburn too. And last, this is the very special thing, so Kaku's ice anomaly application is actually really good, but you wouldn't know unless you actually knew about the mechanics of this team and built her that way. The reason she can do so much ice anomaly is that both her flag swing and the projectile do ice anomaly buildup. This is why Sokaku has to run back to position properly during stun windows. She also uses Freedom Blues extremely well. And last, she needs energy to do this, so you absolutely do not want her signature W engine, which isn't intuitive. So she's actually more of an ice anomaly character when she's played this way. The only problem is that her actual anomaly damage isn't that good. So if you try to do this without Mono Ice, it's not nearly as strong since Miyabi cares more for the disorders than the disorder damage itself. Also, Lycon carries a decent amount of the ice anomaly buildup, and he sometimes needs to be on anomaly mastery, not impact, to make the rotations happen. So Kaku usually doesn't fill up the ice anomaly bar completely on her own anyway. So unfortunately, being an ice anomaly character doesn't really save her much in my opinion when it comes to her versatility. I hope I've explained why Mono Ice is such a unique team and why Sokaku is a very special fit for it, but why despite that, I still think she deserves her spot on this list. Feel free to tell me how wrong I am in the comments though. From here on out, I think most of these picks won't be that controversial. Next up on the list is Seth. Yeah, the Catboy hasn't aged that well. I remember back in 1.1, people thought Seth was going to save the defense class. After all, his identity as a defense character was more distinct. You would benefit from pairing to him, and also he lets you go back to your original character to do their thing. You know, that sounds like a great setup for a hypercarry team composition. There's a couple problems though. He's only worth giving field time if his buffs are worthwhile, so what does he provide for the carry? Well, he gives a shield and some anomaly proficiency. He also has his enhanced basic attack, which reduces the enemy's anomaly buildup resistance. This is decent, except for the fact that it's got a long animation. I'm quite aware that you can animation cancel it, but that doesn't change the fact that this makes him feel a bit clunky. There's also how you build it up. So his game plan is to parry to him, build up some of his bar, then go back. But you could also just use his skill. But if you use his skill, you've only got a short time to use it before you can quick assist back to your carry. It's doable, but this also makes all that bar buildup from parries kind of redundant. And this will vary from enemy to enemy, but you usually don't get enough parries for that buildup to be worthwhile anyway. Last, you could get this debuff by using his chain attack, and oh no, this is quite awful. This chain attack might just be worse than Sokaku's. And even worse than Sokaku, his ultimate is completely worthless. At least Sokaku's refreshes her stacks and lets you instantly give her buffs to your carry, in addition to providing a quick assist. Now let's talk about his versatility. Well, he's got one main niche, and it's to support hypercarry anomaly teams, but there aren't many of those out there. As of right now, the only hypercarry anomaly characters are Jane Doe, Yanagi, Piper, and Miyabi. That's a decent roster, but let's talk about how he slots into. First, he's not great with Yanagi because he dilutes shock, and until Yanagi overwrites the shock, he's really shredding the total polarity disorder damage. Second, she'd much rather have a disorder partner to make use of her disorder buffs. He's not a terrible partner, but there are better options. Miyabi is similar. She doesn't actually care for applying more anomalies like I discussed earlier. She wants disorders. Seth doesn't provide enough anomaly application himself, so he isn't that useful for Miyabi. Piper is decent in theory, but if you pair him with Piper, you'd have to settle for losing out on one of their additional abilities, both of which are really useful. Finally, he does work with Jane Doe. After all, the story does clearly establish a connection, they're from the same faction, and he does in theory work well with her. The only problem here is that he's outclassed, which isn't that big of a problem since he's an A rank. But there's another problem in that it seems like Hoyoverse just hates Jane Doe for some reason. There's no physical weak deadly assault boss, and physical weakness isn't common in Shiyu defense nowadays. So all these factors put together massively hurts his versatility. There is one last reason why he's outclassed, and that's the fact that as a defense agent he provides a shield. This is just so incredibly not useful at all. Unless you're in the tower, you're so rarely at risk of dying unless you aren't paying attention to your screen. Because he allocates some of his power budget to the shield, he loses out on being able to contribute more to the team. While people thought he was going to save the defense class, it's pretty obvious he didn't given that we only got one more defense agent after him. It's clear that there's no way to make defense agents who provide defensive buffs useful without making enemies hit so hard that they just become extremely unfun for the casual player base. It's possible that he can become better in the future with more hypercarry anomaly characters and more threatening enemies, but as of right now, he's just not good. Okay, so about Sokaku being the only controversial pick, I lied. Maybe this isn't as controversial as I think, but at number 2 I have the face of the game, regular A-rank Gambi. I mentioned how Hoyoverse doesn't know what to do with defense characters, but it might honestly be worse with stunners. Enemies tend to have a lot of anti-stunner gimmicks nowadays, so you hardly need stunners to stun enemies anymore. So instead, now they are basically glorified supports. But even still, in my experience, they are outperformed in Deadly Assault and sometimes only pull out ahead when the fastest stun helps you kill a target faster and shield defense. There's a reason why most of them are just glorified supports nowadays. It's because stun speed is usually the last priority in improving a kill. If you stun too fast, you don't have enough decibels for your attacker's ultimate, so if slowing down that stun lets you get a second ultimate for your second stun window, that stun speed is effectively wasted and even harmed your clear. Hugo Vlad is currently the only character who enjoys having the quickest stuns possible. Everyone else wants to space them out enough so they have enough resources to do a decent combo, even if they don't have enough decibels for an ult. Ambi is probably the purest stunner in the game. She genuinely does nothing other than stun. Her mindscape's different damage, but if you build her as a stunner, her damage suffers. Her damage is alright when you build her that way, but then I'll cite the beginning of this video. Otherwise, her team contribution is actually just almost nothing. You have to remember that if you're spending time trying to build days with your stunner, you could also do damage by on-fielding your DPS. So to sum up my point, she does exactly one thing, and that one thing is not very useful. It's worth mentioning Khalid and Polkar here as well, but at least they do have some positive team contributions. I was thinking of putting Polchar on this list, but I don't think that's fair since most players don't have her at M6 yet, so comparing her to other M6 A-rank agents is a bit unfair. Also, you inherently boost your damage by being able to on-field your DPS constantly, and that more than makes up for a slightly slower stun speed, and she also has the best potential to improve in the future when there are more aftershock agents. I think it's funny that as the face of the game, Ambi's really close to the worst agent in the game. She was also the first agent to get directly power crept. I mean, it was the first update, and there was a character who existed where I don't think there was a single instance where you'd rather have A and B over Jingyi. Nicole should have been the face of the game since she's like 20 times more memorable and iconic, and even gameplay wise still holds up as one of the best, compared to her cunning hair's partner who's one of the worst. Now this is where I would put the dishonorable mention section, but I already mentioned most of those who I'd put here already. There's only 2 that I don't think I really talked about enough that are worth mentioning. First off is Rina. The fact that she's an S-rank agent and an M0 is outclassed by 2 A-ranks, one of which is free, is kind of embarrassing for her. Her M1 is probably the single strongest standard mindscape in the game, but the fact that so much power is locked behind that doesn't really help her case. The only other agent worth mentioning here is Ellen. Her damage just aged extremely poorly. Not only is she extremely dependent on her signature W engine, even with it her damage just falls behind. Fortunately, she's getting buffed in Season 2, so let's see who else gets buffed and how meaningful these buffs turn out to be. Okay, so normally number 1 would have some suspense, but I also don't think there's an agent I could make a compelling argument is worse than this one, and that agent is Ben. I already alluded to this earlier in the video by making the claim that Seth was saving the defense class, because that implies that the class needed saving to begin with, and the only defense agent at the time was Ben. Okay, on second thought, maybe I could have swapped around Seth and Anby, but I didn't want both defense agents back to back on this list. So let's get into his kit to see why he's so bad. First off, when you play him, immediately you notice how slow he is. Well, he's a big hulking bear, so I guess it makes sense, but that doesn't do him any favors. His primary gimmick is that if you use his skill and time it right, you can interrupt an enemy and it will do more damage. By using his skill, you can grant your team a small shield and a small crit buff. Like I discussed earlier, the shield isn't useful and the crit buff is so small that it's almost ignorable. Now let's go into his use cases. As not your primary carry, he's bad. As a defense agent, you in theory want to parry to him, but this parry stops the enemy's attack. His signature W engine and his mindscape lets him do more damage when he gets hit, but I can't tell if this applies on the defensive assist because it doesn't do enough damage to be noticeable. So if it doesn't apply on the defensive assist, he has to wait around for the enemy to attack before he uses his skill, and he doesn't have a clean way to go back to the primary carry like Seth, for example. So what about using him as the main carry? I do have some Ben DPS videos on my channel, so clearly I don't think it's that bad. His defense scaling does give him some attack, or you could just build him with full loss offensive stats and ignore the defense scaling part. Well, there's a big problem. Those videos are more so highlighting the power of Lighter, who provides strong buffs which are enough to make him viable. But unfortunately, Lighter is a bit racist. He needs an attacker or a faction member, so if we pair Ben and Lighter, we need someone else to activate Lighter's additional ability, which is really important. At the start of the video, I mentioned how most DPS characters can be carried by supports, but this pairing is restricted to having Lucy or Caesar as the last team member, so by locking him out of Nicole or Astra, his damage ceiling is worse. And finally, his DPS rotation is kind of awkward. After his skill and ultimate, he realistically just runs out of damage. His basic attacks also do physical damage, so they don't benefit from fire damage buffs, and they are pretty slow. This isn't to say he's not clear viable. Zenless Zone Zero has done a good job of making the content balanced enough so that no character is unviable, and that doesn't change the fact that some are just better than others. He really suffers from being an idea that just didn't work out given how this game is. Did you know that he basically has his own signature disk drive set? And better yet, do you know what it does without looking it up? Or have you ever seen anyone use it? Me neither. Now instead of a bear, for season 2 we're getting a panda, so let's see if he can save the defense class again. If you'd like this list, leave a like or comment about everything I got wrong about it. Subscribe for more Zenless Zone Zero content, and I'll see you next time.